A few months ago, I made a light delivery. I remember this well, because it was one of the rare trips where I could go calmly, without rushing and without killing myself going up the hill. The load was just palletized toilet paper, stacked well, and tied down. I saw them load it, checked the seal, everything was fine. But what wasn't right was the weight. As soon as I started turning, I felt the truck pulling. As if it had much more than a few boxes of paper behind it. On the first climb, I had to slow down in a way that didn't make sense. I even stopped at a gas station and checked the tires and suspension. Everything was intact. I thought it was just my imagination. But at night, after the first stop, something else started. A noise. Inside the truck. Like footsteps. Light, spaced out. As if someone was walking on top of the cargo. I knocked on the side to see if it wasn't something loose inside, and the noise stopped. But it came back a few minutes later. But closer to the front of the compartment. I tried to ignore it. I kept going. But with each stop, it seemed like the sound was clearer. More noticeable. As if you knew when I was listening. On the third morning, driving along a deserted road in Texas, the noise turned into a voice. I will never forget that. A thin, very weak voice speaking between the creaks of the structure. I almost lost control of the truck. I turned on the recorder on my cell phone and let it play. When I heard it later, I almost threw the device out the window. A child was saying, "I'm cold, Uncle. Tell my mother." The voice came in a low lament, interrupted by something that sounded like a sob. My blood ran cold. I could no longer pretend it was psychological. I stopped on the side of the road and opened the truck, the flashlight shaking in my hand. Nothing. Absolutely nothing but the boxes, tightly secured, just as they had left the distribution center. I checked them one by one. None of them were moving. But even with the door open, I could smell the colder air inside. And a faint smell, half sweet, half metallic, that shouldn't have been there. I spent the night in the driver's seat, unable to sleep. When dawn came, I went straight to the delivery. I made sure to be the first to unload, and of course, everything was in order. But the weight was still wrong. As if someone was still there. After that delivery, I tried to forget. I continued on other routes, trying to convince myself that it was just fatigue, a suggestion, something. But the problem was that, the sound came back. And I didn't have that truck anymore. I had a new one. But even so, 2 nights later, I heard it again, a foot dragging, a light knock on the inside wall, whispers. And then the same voice, "It's dark in here. Mom?" It felt like the thing had stuck to me, not to the cargo. I started to avoid driving at night. But even during the day, the cabin seemed colder. And I swear I saw breath on the glass once, even with the air conditioning off. I went to talk to a mechanic friend of mine. I didn't go into details, I just asked if some refrigeration system could have leaked or failed. He denied it, but mentioned that another trucker, months ago, had reported a phantom weight in a light load, along with unexplained noises. He said the guy got a little paranoid and ended up abandoning the truck at a rest stop in Oklahoma, leaving a note, "She's still with me." That hit me hard. Because until then, I thought I was just going crazy on my own. But now it seemed like this was happening again. On the next trip, I made sure to take a dashcam facing backwards, inside the truck bed. I set it up to record even in the dark. I drove for 3 nights. And at the end of the 3rd night, when I went to check the footage, there was no one, of course. But in one of the sections, for 14 seconds, the recording fails. And on the way back, the microphone picks up a low laugh. Childish. Repeated. in the same rhythm as the sound of a knock on the bodywork that I had already heard. Only this time, there was something more. After the laugh, a voice whispered very close to the microphone, "I'm here." Clear. No hiss. As if it were inside the camera. Since then, every time I drive, the truck weighs more. Mechanics say everything is fine, but the gears seem to drag. The brakes get spongy when I go over 90 kilometers per hour. And every time I pass an empty gas station, I hear noise in the compartment. I don't even try to open it anymore. Because no matter what I do, it's traveling with me. Sometimes I think the child is not alone. Because I've heard another voice. Deeper. Closer. As if someone were answering for her. Last week, I went on a short trip, only 4 hours on the road. It wasn't raining, it wasn't night, nothing that could justify the heavy weather I felt as soon as I got into the truck. I started the engine, and immediately the radio started to hiss by itself. No station. Just noise. When I turned it off, I clearly heard, without any interference, a voice saying, "She's still waiting." I didn't even have the courage to turn the radio back on. I drove around in total silence, my eyes glued to the road and the constant feeling that there was something breathing behind the wall of the cabin. At the unloading point, the guy in the yard asked if I was transporting frozen goods. I said no. He thought it was strange, then why is the compartment so cold? I was speechless. When I opened the door for them to unload, I saw my own breath coming out in white puffs, even with the strong sun outside. And for the first time, I saw marks. Small impressions on the floor of the truck bed. Like bare, childish feet. 3 pairs. Going from the wall to near the door. One of the helpers saw it too. He looked at me, turned pale, and didn't speak to me again. That trip was the last I made with that truck bed. I asked to change trucks. But the truth is that it didn't help. The weight still follows me. The noises. The voices. I've tried sleeping in a motel to see if it would go away. But now the sound of the child comes through the radio in the room, even though it's turned off. "I'm cold, Uncle." Always the same phrase. Always whispered. And now, sometimes, I hear someone answer, "She'll go away when you take her home." But I don't even know who it is. Or where home would be. And every time I try to find out, the truck gets heavier. If you're driving and you hear footsteps where you shouldn't, or if your load seems heavier than it should, don't listen. Don't respond. Because sometimes, what's with you doesn't want to be forgotten. I recorded the sounds. A child said, "I'm cold, Uncle. Tell my mother." It happened on a Sunday night. I was trying to beat the traffic on the way out of Minneapolis, trying to get to Fargo without taking the stretch of I-94 that was completely blocked because of a nasty accident. My original GPS crashed, so I used another app that a friend had recommended to me, one of those lesser-known apps made for truck drivers. It's called Atlas Route. It pulled up an alternative route that cut through some minor state highways, which seemed fine. Until, halfway through the route, it suggested something strange, crossing Lake Fremont. There was a clear line across the lake, as if there were a road there. But on the traditional map, there was no such thing. I stopped and checked again. The app clearly showed a straight route, as if it were under the lake, and said it was viable. On the screen, the indication was, alternative underground section. Curiosity won out. I had time and was too tired to take a 2-hour walk. I walked to the shore. There were no signs or lights. Just a sort of paved slope to the edge. And, oddly enough, the water there was clear. I saw the beginning of the road underwater. Smooth, straight, intact. And even stranger, I could see soft lights coming from the bottom, like buried streetlights. Everything was calm. No waves. No sound. I thought it was an illusion. But when I got closer to the truck, the front wheel went into the water, and didn't sink. It stayed steady. As if the road was real and solid, even down there. I took a deep breath, turned on the headlights, and got in. The water slowly covered the windshield, but didn't get in. The road was wide and safe, and the truck remained stable as if it were dry asphalt. No sign of a leak. No interference with the engine. Just a muffled sound, as if I had entered a world without air. A strange silence. And the GPS showed the route following normally, as if it were an official part of the road network. I should have turned back. But the further I went, the harder it got. The GPS showed that I was already halfway across. And honestly, it was fascinating. The road under the water seemed so clean. As if it were new. I could see fish swimming by in the distance, small rocks on the bottom, even bits of vegetation. And the road went on. I drove for about 8 minutes. It was all surreal. Until I looked in the mirror, and saw headlights. 2 pairs. Coming behind me, in the water. At first, I thought it was another truck driver. But when I looked closer, the headlights were too low. As if they weren't from a normal vehicle. And they seemed to be, keeping up with my pace. I tried to speed up a little, but the headlights kept up. They didn't get too close, nor did they get too far away. They just followed. Synchronized. And then I noticed something else. They didn't reflect off the water. My headlights reflected everything around me, as if I were in a giant aquarium. But there's nothing. Just a dry, almost opaque light, as if it were coming from the water itself and not from a vehicle. I started to sweat. I looked at the GPS, but it showed nothing but a straight line. No fork. No exit. And when I looked in the rearview mirror again, the headlights had doubled. Now there were 4 pairs. I pressed the radio to call anyone who was in the area, but all I got was a low, repetitive hiss, like an old engine noise. And, in the background, something that sounded like wet whispers. It was impossible to understand what they were saying, but it sounded like a lot of them. I pressed the brakes on instinct, just to see what would happen, and that's when I saw it. When I stopped, the headlights also stopped. But then they went out, all at once. I stood there for a good few seconds, immersed in total darkness, with the engine almost sputtering. And then, suddenly, lights appeared in front of me. But not headlights. They were like flashlights, agitated. As if someone was walking toward me. I put the car in gear with a shaking hand and drove on. I didn't want to know what it was. The taillights didn't come back on. The front lights disappeared after about 30 meters. And then, for the first time, the road began to climb. But even as I climbed, I could still see water everywhere. Then the concrete began to glow with a bluish hue, and I noticed that there were symbols etched into the ground beneath the layer of silt, round symbols, almost like inscriptions. The truck passed over it without any problems, but I felt a strange vibration, as if something had woken up. At the end of the climb, the water started to get clearer. And finally I saw the sky again. I came out on the other side of the lake as if nothing had happened. The road went back to normal. The truck was in one piece. But the GPS turned off. Black screen. It only came back on hours later, as if I had never driven that stretch. When I went to report the route, the system said I had taken a 4-hour detour, along known routes, none close to the lake. To this day I don't know what that road was. All I know is that, since then, whenever I pass lakes at night, I turn off the GPS and avoid looking in the rearview mirror. I spent days trying to figure out what had happened. I spoke to 2 older truck driver friends and described the place without going into too much detail. One of them, a war veteran, was quiet for a while and then asked, "Were there headlights behind?" When I said yes, he hung up. The other sent me a screenshot of an old forum post in which someone described a submerged road in the Midwest that only appears on modified GPS devices. The author said he was only able to get out after following the headlights, and that he had never seen a reflection in a mirror since then. I started noticing other strange things over the next few days. The truck's dashboard would show slight delays in the travel time. Like, I was driving 40 minutes, but the interior clock said 10. One night, while I was sleeping in the cab, I dreamed about the lake. But I wasn't driving. I was stopped. Inside the cabin. And someone, or something, was tapping slowly on the passenger side window. When I woke up, there was a light trail of water running down the inside of the window. I thought it was condensation. But it was too cold. And it smelled faintly, like iron. After that day, I deleted the app. I could never find it in the store. Not even the trip data was saved. It was as if that route had never existed. But the strange thing is that, to this day, when I pass through areas with a lot of fog or cross stretches near dams, the radio starts to crackle. And, for a few seconds, it picks up a frequency with muffled sounds. Like voices talking underwater. And whenever this happens, the rearview mirror goes dark. From the outside, it looks normal. But from the inside, it's as if something is blocking my reflection. So if one day your GPS suggests a route that seems too good to be true, and that route takes you straight into a lake, don't take it. Because maybe you're not just taking a shortcut. Maybe you're entering a place where the rules are no longer ours. I drove underwater for minutes. Until headlights appeared behind, someone following me. It happened near the Arizona-New Mexico border, at one of those truck stopovers that only open at night. I had stopped there before, a simple place with half a dozen spaces, a bathroom in a container, and a snack bar that was never open. But that morning, something was different. As soon as I arrived, I noticed that all the trucks parked there were models I knew. Same years. Same colors. One of them was identical to mine, only with a less dented bumper. I thought it was curious. Coincidence, I thought. Until I saw the white Volvo on the other side of the lot. The owner of this truck, Lucas, was a guy I had met a few weeks earlier at another stop in Colorado. A calm driver with a Texas accent, easygoing conversationalist. And there was the same truck. Same paint job, even the same skull sticker on the back window. I walked over to see if it was him, but when I got closer, something stopped me. The man who got off the truck was Lucas, but it wasn't. His expression was identical. His walk. But there was something artificial about the way he looked at me. Like, recognition without emotion. Like he had identified me but didn't know what to make of it. I froze. And then he spoke. The same voice. Identical. The same tone. The same drawling manner. "Is it okay over there, bro?" That gave me goosebumps. I responded instinctively, a little stiff, and made an excuse to go to the bathroom. On the way, I started to observe the other truck drivers who were there better. And that's when I realized, they all had someone similar somewhere. Some of them, I even recognized from previous stops, fellow drivers on the road. But now, they had copies. And they weren't interacting with each other. Just observing. Standing still, sitting, with their eyes fixed on the trucks. I got back to my car, my head already spinning. When I climbed into the cab and closed the door, I looked in the side mirror, and saw a guy staring at me from across the yard. Tall, black jacket, leaning against a dark blue truck. And the problem was, it was me. Same cap, same jacket, same pants, even the way he crossed his arms. I froze. I didn't know whether to shout, start the engine, or get out to face him. But he just stood there, staring at me, as if he was waiting for something. I stood there for a moment, motionless, staring at my own vivid reflection. It didn't seem curious or threatening. It seemed calculating. Then he smiled. And that's what made me panic. Because I never smile like that. It was a cold, mechanical expression, as if I had rehearsed it and still gotten it wrong. I turned on the engine right away. The other truck drivers didn't even react. They remained in their positions, as if nothing was wrong. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw that several of them were watching me now. The others. Duplicates. Fixed. Unblinking. As if I had done something that had triggered something. I put the car in gear and drove off slowly. But to get out, I had to go all the way around the yard. And when I passed the rest area, I saw more of them. More versions of people I knew. All of them wearing very similar clothes, identical trucks. But in absolute silence. And that's when I noticed something else. There was no sound there. None. No engine running, no crickets, no wind. Just the sound of my own truck. And a very soft, low-pitched hum coming from the radio, even though it was turned off. As if the whole place was suspended from the real world. A dead zone. When I finally got close to the exit, I saw something that haunts me to this day. Parked outside the yard, right at the entrance, was my own truck. Same model. Same license plate. Only clean, as if it had never been driven a day in its life. And inside it, someone was sitting in the driver's seat. Head down. I only looked up out of reflex when I passed by. And there, inside that truck, it was me. Sleeping. I swear on everything. It was me. Exactly how I lie down during breaks. Same wrinkled shirt. Same loose belt. And that broke me. Because for a second, I no longer knew if I was the original. I sped up. I left that place as fast as I could. I drove for 2 hours straight until I stopped at a busy gas station, where there was noise, the smell of diesel, and people alive. I tried to explain to the attendant where I had been, but he said that there were no rest stops on that stretch of highway. That there was only forest and empty roads for almost 80 kilometers. I checked the map. Nothing. Not on the app, not on the GPS. The stop point doesn't exist. But I remember the asphalt. I remember the closed diner. I remember me staring back at me. And most of all, I remember my own voice coming out of someone else's mouth. Ever since that night, I've been living with a strange feeling. It's like when you wake up from a dream and you're not sure if you're actually awake. Sometimes, I look in the mirror and wonder if I'm really myself or some kind of copy that escaped without realizing it. It sounds like paranoia, I know. But it's hard to explain what stayed with me. The world seems a little behind schedule. As if everything was delayed by half a second. I've tried to go back to that part of the road. I've driven for hours. I've never found it again. But I'm sure it's there. Hidden. Waiting for another distracted person to turn onto the road that only appears when you're already inside. I spoke to 2 truck drivers who I suspect also went through something similar. One of them, when I mentioned seeing someone like them, simply changed the subject and went blank. The other said to me, very quietly, "They copy what we leave in the rearview mirror." He never mentioned it again. And you know what? I believe him. Since then, I avoid looking back too much while driving. I cover the center mirror with tape. And when I stop, I always leave something on the seat, a chain, a note, anything, as if it were a mark. So I know I'm still with myself. Nowadays, I avoid making short stops at night. I only pull over in areas with people, noise, and light. But sometimes, even with all that, I feel a kind of presence. As if someone were following me from afar. A truck just like mine. With someone who knows me better than I know myself. Someone who is watching me. And every time I hear someone calling my name in a place where there is no one, I freeze. Because deep down, I know that at some point, he will want his place back. So, if one day you stop at a rest stop and see a truck just like yours, don't approach it. And, most importantly, never respond if someone calls you by name in your own voice. I went to greet the guy in the white Volvo, and he had my voice. It all started after a silly accident. I was on a routine route in southern Colorado, carrying a simple load of tools and construction equipment. I took a steep downhill slope and, through distraction, misjudged a sharp curve. Nothing serious, the truck didn't turn, but the trailer hit the side of a guardrail hard. The bodywork was badly dented on one side, making a loud noise, but I managed to maintain control and park safely. I filed a police report, called the company's support team, and they authorized me to continue my journey anyway, since the structure was solid and the load intact. But it was only after the impact that things started to get strange. The first night after the accident, I pulled over at a gas station in Utah. While I was sleeping in the passenger seat, I started hearing a low, intermittent noise. It was like air slowly escaping, like an old bellows. I woke up thinking it was a tire leak or a problem with the air brakes. But the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the side of the trailer. I got up, went outside with my flashlight, and walked around, nothing out of place. But then I put my hand on the dented bodywork, and felt it. The metal expanding and contracting. As if it were breathing. Warm. Rhythmic. I got back to the truck, shaking. I thought about turning around, pulling into the first garage I came across, and abandoning the delivery, but something held me back. Maybe it was sleep, maybe it was fear of looking crazy. The next day, I continued on my way. And the sound continued. It didn't happen all the time. It would come when the engine turned off. When I stopped at a traffic light. It was as if that part of the trailer had taken on a life of its own. But the worst was yet to come. 3 nights later, in an empty parking lot on the side of Route 50, I heard a different sound, knocking. Soft. Rhythmic. Coming from inside the bodywork. It was like hearing a heartbeat. Seriously. I'm not exaggerating. I touched the dented part again, and this time, I could feel every pulse. The frame moved lightly, like a chest filling with air. Too warm to the touch. The kind of heat that comes from inside something alive. I stood there for about 10 seconds, mesmerized. And when I took my hand away, the bodywork felt stuck to my palm. Like it was trying to retain my touch. I sat back down on the bench with my chest tight. I knew this wasn't normal. That it wasn't psychological. Because now, it had rhythm. It had intention. The next day, I went straight to a garage in Ely, Nevada. I asked them to check everything. I didn't mention the sound, just that the trailer seemed unstable after the crash. The mechanic did a thorough inspection. He couldn't find anything wrong with it other than the dent. He only mentioned that, strangely, the temperature inside the cargo area was higher than normal, even without direct sunlight or heating. When I said that the trailer seemed heavier than before, he joked, "Only if it's breathing, buddy." I couldn't laugh. I left that same day, trying to ignore what was already obvious. On the next trip, things got worse. The breathing became louder in the early hours of the morning. I would drive through deserted stretches and, with the engine off or idling, I could clearly hear the sound of air being sucked in and out. It wasn't a leak. It was organic. And then the sound started, from inside. As if something was dragging itself against the floor of the truck. Scratching, moving, keeping up with my pace. One morning, I heard something that made me stop for good on the shoulder of the road, the sound of sobbing. Loud, muffled, as if someone was crying in the compartment. I thought about opening it, but something kept me from doing so. As if my body knew that it shouldn't be touched. Instead, I started recording the sound with my phone. I left the microphone on every night. On the third day, I captured a sound that I've never been able to erase from my mind, a whisper, barely audible, saying, "I'm awake." After that, the knocking got louder. So did the breathing. And once, I swear to God, I saw the side of the trailer expand and contract as if it were gasping for breath. The bodywork moved in sync with the whispers. It wasn't an illusion. I decided to go back to base and ask them to transfer the trailer. But when I got to the company yard, no one could uncouple it. The system was locked. The cables were jammed. One of the maintenance guys leaned on the bodywork and immediately moved away, saying that it seemed to be pulsing inside. Another said he heard a sound like liquid running across the floor. And the weirdest thing, the floor where the trailer had been parked for less than 2 hours, was damp. No rain. No leaks. It looked like sweat. As if it were, really alive. Since then, I have refused to work with that trailer. I have asked for leave. But I still hear stories from colleagues who were assigned to it. They all talk about the strange weight, the temperature inside, the noises during the night. One of them was locked inside for almost an hour because the door locked by itself. He said he heard something banging outside, as if there were people around. But when they opened it, there was no one there. Only hot air coming out of it, with a noise that he described as, sigh. After that, he resigned. He disappeared. No one has heard from him since. I started researching and discovered something that made my blood run cold. The route where I had the accident, years ago, was the scene of a horrible pileup with a tanker truck. Several vehicles caught fire, and one of them was carrying live cattle. Most of them died trapped in the trailer, suffocated, cooked alive. My trailer was the same model as one of the ones that burned. The company bought used parts to assemble new fleets after that year. And since then, 2 similar units have been decommissioned due to reports of abnormal behavior. I don't know if what I carried for days and nights was some kind of residual energy, trauma embedded in the metal, or something that was actually born, something that grew inside the deformed structure of the truck. But I'm sure of one thing, it wasn't my imagination. It breathed. It felt. And sometimes it even seemed to be trying to communicate. When I touched it with my hand, the bodywork would tremble slightly, as if responding to the touch. As if, hoping not to be left alone. If you ever drive by a trailer with a dented body and hear a muffled, intermittent sound coming from the bottom of the frame, don't pull over. Don't try to open it. And most of all, don't respond. The bodywork expanded and contracted. And inside, something was beating, like a heart. This happened on the border between Kansas and Oklahoma, on a side road that I took by mistake while the GPS was recalculating. It was about 2:30 in the morning, moonless, lightly foggy, and the road was empty. When I saw the toll sign, I thought it was strange because it wasn't on any of my updated maps. But the structure was there, 2 booths, barriers, a worn sign with the state symbol. Everything was old, as if no one had used it for decades. The strangest thing was the booth on the right, with the barrier raised and a small, dim light inside, like an emergency flashlight, but I couldn't see anyone. I stopped as a precaution. I don't like to pass through these places without paying, even if they seem abandoned. I got out with the flashlight and approached slowly. That's when I saw the sign, a crooked metal sign attached to the side of the booth, handwritten, almost faded, exact amount in coins. Old coins only. Underneath, a small rusty tray, the kind used to return change. There was no set amount, just this absurd demand. I laughed at the time, a little nervous, thinking it was some kind of prank or bizarre roadside sculpture. But when I turned my back, I heard a sharp click. The barrier, which was already up, moved by itself. I went back to check. Everything was still. But the commotion put me on alert. I rummaged through my wallet out of reflex and found an old $1 coin, one of those souvenirs that my father had given me years ago and that I had never taken out of my coat pocket. I put it on the tray, half laughing at the coincidence, thinking that maybe it was what the booth wanted. I swear to you, as soon as the coin touched the bottom, someone picked it up. I didn't see the movement. But I felt it. The tray sank and rose again, as if a hand had taken the coin. Then the silence returned. Except, I wasn't alone there. I took 2 steps back and stared at the dark opening of the cab. The flashlight trembled in my hand. And then there was the sound. A low whisper, coming not from the cab but from the ground. It was a faint, hoarse voice that said clearly, "Thank you." And right after that, a cold breeze rose from the drainage grate next to the frame. As if something was breathing down there. I didn't scream. I didn't run. But I climbed into the truck and locked it inside with a shaking hand. Before I put it in gear, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The cab light had gone out. But the tray was empty. I tried to continue my journey as if nothing had happened, but the atmosphere in the truck became strange. You know when the air feels heavier? Denser? That's how it was. I turned on the radio to distract myself, and the only station that came on was playing old music, like from the 1930s, with that vinyl hiss. I changed the frequency, but they were all the same style. No voices. No advertisements. Just music from another era, as if the world outside had stopped in time. When the road finally connected with the main route again, the normal signal came back. But I still had a lump in my throat. The next day, I met a colleague at a stopover in Tulsa. I told him briefly what had happened, without going into details. He was quiet for a while and then asked, "Was that the old toll booth near exit 19? I said yes. He turned white. He said that no one goes there anymore. That the section was closed decades ago, after a landslide opened a crevasse beneath the booths. 3 employees went missing at the time. They only found one of the booths intact, the one on the right, and the rest swallowed up by the ground. The place was fenced off, but from time to time, the structure reappears on some drivers' maps. The weirdest part? He said there are reports of people stopping there and paying with old coins, and then starting having recurring dreams about the road sinking. People hearing voices asking for help under the truck, or seeing hands banging against the floor of the cabin during the night. And when he showed me a picture of the toll booth, taken in the 70s, it was the same one. Identical. Same 2 booths, same signage. Except the one on the right, the one I stopped at, had been sealed since back then, with boards nailed to the outside. So, if that's true, how did I see it working? Ever since that day, I've kept the tray I found on the floor of the truck. That's right, when I went to unload it, it was there, out of nowhere. The same one from the cabin. Rusty, with fingernail marks underneath. Every time I try to throw it away, it reappears. Once, I left it on the side of the road. A few days later, it was in the glove compartment. Another time, I left it at a gas station, and the next day, it was stuck between the seat and the wall of the cabin. And the weirdest thing, it always has a different coin inside. Old. As if someone was giving back. Since then, I have avoided unfamiliar routes at dawn. I update my maps before each trip. But even so, I have noticed that sometimes the GPS freezes near that area, and a red line appears as if it were tracing a new route, always towards that section. I have never returned, but I know that if I follow it, it will be there. Even if others swear it has been demolished. The worst part is that I still hear the same "thank you" from time to time, coming from nowhere. Low, muffled. I have woken up in the middle of the night with it inside the cabin. Just the word. Nothing else. The other day, at a gas station in Amarillo, I met an older driver who noticed the tray when I walked into the cafeteria. He turned pale. He pulled me aside and said he'd seen that same tray before. That it goes from hand to hand, choosing the next one. I asked him what he meant by that, and all he said was, the last person who tried to break it, disappeared. I've never seen that guy again. I don't even know if he still drives. But ever since then, I've left the tray there, in the same place, with the coin that appears, without touching it. Because every time I hear the "thank you," another coin appears. I thought about giving up everything and leaving. Selling the truck, changing my life. But then I remembered that maybe the problem isn't the truck. Or the road. Maybe the problem is having paid. Maybe when you agree to give something, it traps you. And now, I feel like I'm paying forever, one coin at a time. I don't know to whom. I don't know why. I just know that they're down there. Waiting. Breathing. And with each payment, it seems like they get closer to the surface. So, if you're driving in the middle of the night and come across a toll booth in the middle of nowhere, don't stop. And if you do stop, don't pay. Because someone will. I dropped the coin. A skeletal hand picked it up. And I heard a "thank you" coming from under the asphalt.